Hello, this is Tim Mans
And John White.
And Chris Robinson.
and we're from Radio Plymouth, welcoming you aboard the Wheel of Plymouth.
365 tons of steel and stuff. You know, that's one for every day of the week.
How does that work?
Like clockwork.
Indeed. And you're in one of 42 air-conditioned capsules where you're about to take a trip that will give you a bird's-eye view of Plymouth from some 60 metres above the ground.
That's twice the height of Smeaton's Tower over there. You know, the striped lighthouse that used to stand out on the Eddystone Reef until the authorities became concerned about the rocks that it was standing on.
Yes, and so they built a new one in the 1880s, and someone had the bright idea of bringing the old one back and re-erecting it on Plymouth Hoe.
Amazingly enough, this was relatively straightforward, as Smeaton had designed it so that all the enormous blocks that made up the lighthouse were interlocking and could be dismantled and reassembled.
Smeaton's Tower succeeded 3 wooden structures on the Eddystone Reef, and it was so famous and successful in its day that in 1860, 100 years after it had been completed, it was featured on the back of our old English pennies and stayed there until 1895.
And then it was reinstated in 1937, right through until decimalisation, which was how long ago?
In 1971.
Thank you. And so, the next time you see an old penny, have a look. You'll see it just behind Britannia, on the other side from the Queen's Head.
OK, what else should we look at?
Well, beyond the lighthouse, that's Plymouth Sound, one of the world's great natural harbours. This was the last home stop for many famous trips and expeditions.
Sir Francis Drake left from here in 1577 on what would become a 3-year voyage of circumnavigation, and again in 1588, when he famously finished his game of bowls on the Hoe before setting off to see off the Spanish Armada.
It wasn't just bravado, he was waiting for the tide to turn, you know.
This was also the final departure point for the Pilgrim Fathers in 1620, before they set sail across the Atlantic in their tiny ship, the Mayflower, bound for a new life in the New World.
Captain Cook sailed from here too, on each of his 3 major trips to the Southern Hemisphere.
And so did the 22-year-old Charles Darwin when he left with Captain Fitzroy on the Beagle, bound for South America and the Far East, on a journey that would ultimately lead to Darwin's development of the theory of evolution.
Yes, the Beagle left from Barnpool on the other side of the entrance to the Tamar in what is now Cornwall, but was then West Stonehouse and part of Plymouth. We gave it back to the Cornish in 1844.
The Tamar, over there to the west of us, today separates Devon and Cornwall. It runs from here for some 50 miles to just a dozen or so miles from the north coast, so it virtually makes Cornwall into an island.
And if you look the other way to the east, you can see the mouth of the River Plym, which separates Plymouth from Plympton and Plymstock, although they all became part of one big city in 1967.
Looking out that way, of course, we can see, just to the left as we look out to the sea, the Royal Citadel.
Did you know that they say that this is the finest 17th century fortification in Europe?
Yes, and it's been continuously manned by British servicemen since 1670.
It's currently the home of 29 Commando.
It was built by King Charles II just after the restoration of the monarchy, which had happened 10 years earlier.
Plymouth had become the only town in England to successfully withstand a royalist siege, and had it fallen, the outcome of the English Civil War may not have gone in Cromwell's favour.
The Roundhead leader was well received when he came here in triumph after the Battle of Naseby in March 1645, but Plymouth's resistance of the royalist cause had angered Prince Charles, hence after the restoration of the monarchy, he ordered a fort much bigger than the one Drake had created in Elizabeth's reign, and much bigger than the original Plymouth Castle that gives the city its coat of arms.
Yes, and not only was it bigger, but the guns faced the town as well as the sea. Charles wasn't going to stand for any more trouble from the people of Plymouth.
By the way, did you know that it's said that every man, woman and child carried at least 1 stone up to the site to contribute to the construction of the citadel?
Really? I didn't know that. Talking of dumping stones, did you know that in order to get the breakwater built, they dropped millions of tons of stone into